Space is it's quantifiable in terms of the geometry. We know that it has a geometric structure. Buckminster Fuller, Max Planck, like there have been genius minds that have explored the structure of space-time. And the basics that we can start with are the phi ratio, that beautiful spiral we see everywhere. And there's another pattern that we see everywhere. You can see it in this background, this hexagonal lattice work, right? We're going to look at a lot of the tensegrity that comes in the geometry, the flexibility, while also being firm and structured, right? So our natural world knows this intelligence. It's organic. It's a default to create geometric structure. And the hexagon is a default because it is the most efficient way of packing information. There is no space lost when you connect hexagons, both on a 2D plane as well as the 3D plane, right? It bends and there is no loss of space. So we have the intelligence of honeybees. Prayer for the bees. We pause and just say, thank you to the pollinators. We don't exist without them. They're based in a hexagonal structure. And we'll also say thank you to the water because we don't exist without it. We do not exist without water, which has a fundamental pattern, a hexagonal pattern, right? So connecting with the phi, connecting with the hexagon, understanding these larger structures is part of breaking down the illusion of separation. Okay? And that takes us to sacred geometry, right? And that six-sided hexagon, right? The seed of life, that is literally the seed of all geometric pattern. I'm blown away year after year by finding out again and again that that is literally the germination point. It is the seed point for every single geometry, right? It leads us into the flower of life, which is infinitely fractalizing pattern, and connects us on the meta as well as like our biology, right? The seed of life literally mimics the first moments of conception for the human form, right? It is our biology. The phi is our DNA. The seed is our cellular structure, the geometric representation. And we see these things on a 2D level, but they're multidimensional. Right? So you've got this seed that replicates, our cells that replicate and bifurcate the divisions, the monad into the dyad, the two circles that create the vesica Pisces. There's so much in everything. That time to take a breath with the seed of life. I want to invite you all to breathe and connect with your biology, right? We can, by meditating, I wanted to come out of screen share. I didn't want to do that. By meditating with the geometry, externally and internally, right? You can use it to connect with your own biology, your own physical form, and anchor in this physical form in order to expand your consciousness out. Anchoring in the geometry to up-level into space-time or infinity. So surrounding yourself with harmonics of geometry, beginning to integrate the harmonics of geometry, and connect with an embodied intelligence. And we've got all these concepts, the idea of infinity, geometric fractalizing patterns. And we kind of know that we are that, but we can also breathe into that, right? There's so many different levels. And the more you breathe with it, the deeper you go. Right? There's that linear rational aspect, that left brain. Then the right brain is the more connected. I'm going to say softer, but the more creative, like, potential of unfettered exploration, right? And we have to anchor in the body, anchor in the geometry in order to traverse the universe. And what I found is breath work. Breath integrates. Breath is its own geometry. And the breath is divine. The breath is our divinity and the bridge. So pause with the breathing, pause with the integration. That's where the intelligence is. Good to be along for the ride with you. For whoever's still watching, hopefully the larger idea of expansion and the potential that geometry has to facilitate that. Hopefully that theme is coming through, because that's my goal, that's my experience, and that's the real potential of it. So that's why I get jazzed about it. Okay, we've got the fundamentals, right? We're going to go back to ourselves as trying to contemplate big numbers, right? Trying to contemplate truth, right? Structure and infinite, and some very large numbers that have to do with energy, right? If we're using geometry to define energy, we can go from, we can use the form of a seed, right? We can tap that internal structure and expand it to the flower of life, right? Which in its spherical form also has that a tetrahedral structure, and it has that geometry. It has that linear sort of equation. So here's this beautiful 3D representation, and really it's multi-D. This is like flipping out of space, time, and moving in our consciousness and all of those dimensions, bridging us with alternate realities. It also has a linear structure, and that is the 64-star tetrahedron. Okay? The 64 tetrahedrons that create the lattice work for our reality. The bones, right? We're getting into the flower of life. We're getting into some of the more complex geometries that can explain an infinite source of energy, right? This is another way of interpreting the potential of space-time, the potential of space, right? Space itself has a geometry, and this is part of geometric structure, right? It's based in a hexagon, but it's also based in a tetrahedral structure. That was the 3D version. This is the 2D version, right? So it's this beautiful interwoven lattice work that is part of the field, right? It's part of the quantum field where we are all connected, right? Beyond the physical into the conscious, right? We can take this structure of our conscious waking mind into the quantum consciousness of that 90% of the subconscious mind, and we can bridge the two, and we can begin to move in the connectivity that is represented through the geometry. And I'm a big fan of Nassim. I'm also a big fan of Adam Apollo. They're two really genius pioneers in understanding the structure of our reality. understanding that there is a fundamental principle that is solid and yet flexible at the same time. So vibrational tensegrity is when the structure holds and is also permeable, right? Maintains quantum information, maintains an Akashic record, but also flexes with infinite potentials, right? Infinity of potentials, right? The Akash that holds all that ever has been, all that will be, and all that is. It has a structure that can then flex. And that's one of the space-time principles, is that there is vibrational tensegrity. Based in vibration, geometry is the manifestation of vibration and frequency. So within the 64 star tetrahedron, we have the fundamental star tetrahedron, right? And you can break this apart. What we're getting to is looking at the center of the 64 star tetrahedron, because it's got a very important capability, right? So I'm just going to break this down. This is a small video from the Samharamane, and it just takes apart the star tetrahedron in a lovely illustration. And we're just going to glimpse it. Showing a fundamental structure called the cube octahedron. And looking at the cube octahedron, it is a unique geometry. It is the only geometry that has equal measurements, right? So it's also called the vector equilibrium, meaning vector line segments, equilibrium, equal proportion, right? So this is the only geometry in all vectorial capability, right? Potential that is perfectly balanced, right? Independently, right? We've got balanced shapes, the tetrahedrons, the larger structures, but within the star tetrahedron is this shape, the vector equilibrium, and it also fractalizes infinitely large and infinitely small. And the reason it's significant is because it has a perfect point of stillness. It has a point of equilibrium. And you can look at this as a singularity. This is a geometry that in its harmonic, in that vector equilibrium, in that equal line segment, it creates that point of infinite potential. This is the geometry of infinite potential, of an energy source, right, of singularity. I mean, this goes all the way to looking at this as proton, as black hole, as, I mean, this is such an oversimplified version, honestly, of what this shape has to offer and tapping into what the universe has to offer. But this is our best way, right? This is the way we can theoretically interpret our world, is through geometry. And this shape holds, it contains perfect balance, perfect equilibrium, right? So this is the cube octahedron, because it's a cube and an octahedron mashed up together, platonic solids. We'll get to those in a little bit. Cube octahedron, vector equilibrium. And when we're talking about this center point as an infinite source of energy, again, trying to conceptualize of what that means, if we do a little analogy for that center point, that perfectly created source of infinite potential, we can think about our reality as if we're trying to measure space-time, right? We've got this, if we could condense our known universe, to try and conceptualize of, like, that's the biggest thing we could imagine that contains energy, right? Is the whole universe, quasars, pulsars, galaxies, I mean, on, right? All of this known and unknown, like yet explored, horizons of space. If we were to condense that down to the size of a sugar cube, this is my special little galactic sugar cube. If we were to condense the entire energy of the universe into a cubic centimeter of space, it would not have the same energy density as a cubic centimeter of empty space. It all has to do with the vacuum density. There's some really cool quantum physics behind it. But basically, all of that is to say, if you had like the cube octahedron and this center point that is just a moment in space-time. I mean, this is huge compared to the quantum levels where the energy actually exists. This is our brains using geometry to grasp a structure. The amount of energy in this amount of space. Are you ready for it? We really can't. It's hard for the brains, these numbers, right? But the amount of energy in that amount of space, the energy density of the universe, if you were to compact it to the size of this sugar cube, cubic centimeter, it has 10 to the 55th, right? Like, we can't get it. There is no way for our brains to understand that amount of zeros and what that means exponentially, because we can't quantify our universe to that degree, right? We can try with some numbers in the Hubble telescope, but that's the entire universe compact. But the energy density in that single cubic centimeter of space is 10 to the 93rd, right? It's almost double the amount of energy that is in our entire universe, in that tiny point of singularity, right? So much energy. When you start to work with the vector equilibrium, you're starting to tap an understanding that geometry can get us to infinite sources of energy, right? And infinite sources of energy outside of ourselves, but also within ourselves. This is the macro and the micro. This is energy density outside of us, where space has a geometric structure where we can access that energy. But it's also energy density within us, right? And that we too have infinite source and infinite capacity. And this is the place where point of stillness that we seek in meditation, the chi, the life force. This is the structure, right? This is one of the structures that represents that potential, right? That infinite potential within us, right? This is our ability to harness our own consciousness, right? And how powerful that could be, and how powerful we really are, very cut off from the true potential. And so beginning to sit with that geometry, beginning to enhance the understanding of that point of stillness and what accessing it can do, the way it could liberate us from the restricted forms that we've been told that we are. We're talking about geometric structures that are able to expand and contract and connect us with the infinite as well as the finite. That's the vector equilibrium. I don't know where we're going next. Right. So vector equilibrium, we saw the two-dimensional grid of the 64-star tetrahedron. But this is what it looks like from the 3D perspective. Right? And again, that's the best effort we have to conceptualize that these shapes are alive, that they are part of the flexible structure. And that means moving flexibly from this dimension into other dimensions. And that it can be part of the bridge where we start to understand how to move in simultaneity in parallel universes and how to connect with ourselves that exist, other aspects of ourselves that are part of our oversoul and they're part of the larger consciousness, right? So this shape, excited. This shape is part of how we understand our vastness, right? That seems strange to go, oh, this little shape is part of how we bridge our realities, literally. Yes, precisely.